Okay.
All right, thanks, Lois. Hi, everyone. I'm Margot Conahan, ACRL's Manager of Professional Development. Thanks for joining us today so you can learn more about our Libraries Transform Toolkit. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded and we'll share out the link to the recording shortly after today's session. Our presenters today are Cynthia Ippoletti, University Librarian and Director at the Aurora Library, Kristen Mastel, Outreach and Instruction Librarian at the University of Minnesota, and Devin Savage, Interim Dean at Illinois Institute of Technology. Thanks again for joining us, and Cynthia, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Margot and Lois. And I'm really excited to be here this morning with everyone and with my great colleagues, Kristen and Devin, to be able to talk a little bit about this effort that has literally been, I think, like 3 years in the making. So we're very excited to be able to present this toolkit. And I apologize, I'm getting over a cold, so I may need to cough. I'll try to minimize that as much as I can. I know there was a question in the chat about, are we sharing the materials as well? Yes, I believe we'll be able to happy to share the PowerPoint, and the URL for the toolkit itself is listed on this first slide. It's live, it's in LibGuide, so you're welcome to look at it and visit it anytime that you like. Okay, so just a little bit of background about how this whole project came about. In about 2015, the ACRL Board of Directors decided they wanted to create a task force to kind of mirror and parallel ALA's Libraries Transform campaign, but make it really focused towards ACRL membership and needs. And there was a call put out, and we all applied and we got on the task force, and so that's how we came to be able to work on this project. And we were basically charged to develop messages and resources that address the needs of academic and research libraries, again, kind of mirroring the ALA Libraries Transform campaign. So in some sense, we had kind of a very open-ended charge, I would say, and that was part of the challenge that we faced, is trying to really figure out how do we take a very robust, already existing campaign, but still make it into something that would be very useful for ACRL membership in general. So these are all the folks who worked on the toolkit and on the task force. I'm not going to read all their names, but I will mention that we did loop in additional folks, such as the ACRL Val Committee, the Marketing and Outreach Interest Group, and Kristen and a few other colleagues, because we wanted to make sure that we were kind of thinking about all the different areas and aspects that we needed to be thinking about. So although the original task force was a bit smaller, we ended up kind of growing it and really getting a very rich feedback and content as a result. So again, kind of just going through just the very beginning of everything, the first objectives that we really wanted to think about were to review the because statements from ALA, develop a process for creating a needs assessment, because we felt like we didn't really have a great understanding of what folks really needed. And we also decided to do a literature review. One of the things was that we didn't really want to be either recreating what ALA was doing in its totality, and we wanted to try to get, again, a sort of a rich understanding of the landscape. And we also didn't want it to be just about marketing and outreach, because there were other tools, other resources out there that were doing that really, really well. So we were really trying to figure out what are we doing here? So in about 2016, we decided to launch into some of these activities, and we met with ALA's Public Advocacy Office, and they kind of suggested, maybe you don't want to kind of necessarily develop these statements by yourselves. So be thinking about what ideas membership really is interested in. And that's when we first started thinking about a toolkit. We also launched the survey, and we started talking with folks via virtual focus groups to get a better understanding of, again, what the needs are. In March, we again identified some of these additional collaborators and partners, such as the Value of Academic Libraries Committee, the Marketing and Outreach Groups, and we also worked with Gail at the request of the ACRL Board of Directors to help us consult and also help us develop some of the actual marketing materials and the customizable graphics and things like that we just didn't really have the capacity to do on our own at that time. And so we asked the ACRL board to transition to the development, which included talking about how we would host the toolkit and how we would develop the professional development program around the toolkit, of which this is one of the things that we ended up doing. We also had a luncheon at the most recent ACRL conference just last month to talk a little bit about how the toolkit came to be and again, provide this background. And we luckily were granted an extension to develop the toolkit and bring in all these partners, because that really added to kind of the workload and the workflow of how everything went. And so through the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018, again, we kind of met with our partners. We started looking at the survey results, and we were trying to really figure out how would this toolkit be structured, what would we want to add in it, kind of how would everything sort of work. And then, of course, we spent the majority of 2018 then developing the content, going back and forth, and ultimately now kind of at this time point, developing the professional development to go with it and really looking towards the next steps ahead. And before I forget, I do also want to mention we are talking still with the board of directors to figure out how we make sure that the toolkit remains current and relevant, because we realize materials like these can in fact become obsolete very, very quickly. So we want to make sure that the content is always useful. So this is kind of what the needs assessment revealed. We had about 122 respondents that filled this out, and we really looked towards to ACRL membership and some board members and section leaders and kind of basically everyone. And we also conducted some focus groups with volunteers, again, to get a little bit more in-depth information. And then, as I mentioned, we did conduct a literature review as well, again, to see, are we missing anything? Has anything like this been done? Kind of what's the landscape looking like? So the results are as follows. I'm not going to read everything that's on the slide, but basically what we found is that most librarians had an adequate level of confidence about their library's ability to market and reach out and engage with the user populations that they had. Some of them used kind of quantitative statistics like gate counts and things like that to measure the impact of these various activities, and others as well relied on social media, and some of them just didn't really do anything at all. We also found out that some of the biggest marketing and outreach challenges was just getting assistance and having access to materials so that they didn't have to kind of start every time from scratch and try to reimagine, oh, now we have to talk with this user population or do this effort. What do we do now? And of course, students and faculty were the majority of folks of the different audiences that most folks were interested in. And when we asked about what kind of materials or training or artifacts would be most useful, and actual content, so materials, really resonated with people. There had been previously a toolkit on the ACRL website that was in Word format, but we just felt like that particular format, although I think it was from 2007, might have been useful at the time, we really felt like it was time for us to really look at that again and figure out where do we go from here and how do we, again, update that content to make it relevant and useful. Okay, and I believe that is the end of my section, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kristen. Thank you.
Actually, I think it's
or is it
I'm taking over. Sorry.
Yes,
so if you'll just bear with me for a second on because statements. Not one thing I've found is not everybody is familiar with these. As certainly we have become familiar with them. But again, as Cynthia mentioned earlier, the desire to develop these is one of the sort of integral parts of why this group came to be. Was a sort of initial thrust of our activity was developing these and seeing kind of what people thought of them. But the reason that they existed and became very popular, I think, in the public library world, grew out of this ALA project for marketing and advocacy and kind of quick takeaways for libraries to quickly articulate their services and resources in a way that would really resonate with their audiences. So that you can think of them kind of like brand statements, but the big thing about them is they're supposed to be pithy and soundbite and really get to the heart of what's important to maybe a particular group. So next. So it was one of the things that we built pretty put very upfront in this live guide. So you can see here in a screenshot of the live guide that we did create some sample statements, but we also provided a way for people to create their own and a little bit of guidance on how you might create your own, using the because statement template to create your own. And if you go to the next, I want to really echo Cynthia's mentioning of this as this whole toolkit as sort of a starting point. This is something that we wanted to, provide people so they could quickly get started on doing marketing advocacy for their own libraries. But we wanted to make sure that it's something that gets better as it goes, something that, gets enriched by the community that's using it, namely the librarians and who have responsibilities for the outreach activities. So you'll see as we go through the slides here, there's a lot of, share your examples. And this is, you can see the box here, where you can, if you get something that you're really proud of, or you think just something that might be useful to other people in your situation, you can share those, those sample templates and graphics and so forth here. Next. So one of the things we also try to tackle was replacing this old 30-page PDF that was a marketing and outreach toolkit the ACRL used to have, and it was really kind of burdensome to read through. It wasn't necessarily bad, but one of the things we really heard about from our from our surveys and focus groups and such was that people wanted kind of an easy way, very familiar way to look and get started. And so we, using the live guide as a guide, as a resource to replace the toolkit seemed like a very natural sort of thing for us to do. So, so this community engagement framework piece is really the big part of how we were trying to do that. So, and of course, throughout here we have, an understanding of how community engagement is a process of organizations building lasting relationships so they can provide a collective vision that benefits the community. And how do you apply that so it actually, how do you actually implement that? And how do you identify the networks, the ideas about how libraries might take leadership in this sort of activity and spread awareness and these sort of things. So next. An important part of this, of course, is also who. So you get a sense of, who you're targeting, and how that might shape your message or your partnership or the design of your activities. That was actually one really interesting thing that we got back from all the different libraries that responded to our initial survey was that there wasn't really one group that academic libraries were looking to connect with. A lot of libraries said, students obviously the most important, but a lot of libraries said faculty, and some said, library staff is actually a very important part of this, or campus administrators. So there were all these different kinds of things that people really wanted to target and were having trouble figuring out how they would communicate that value to, or create that engagement with those communities. So I really like this particular graphic of thinking about community-based outreach and how you go from identifying the community and then you identify the partnership type and so forth. And you walk through it until you get to kind of the outcomes. Next. But one thing I really don't want people to lose here is that the one drop-down menu we have among these 5 tabs is here in the framework for community engagement. So obviously, there's the blueprint for the community engagement, there's audiences, but also this will help walk you through outreach strategies. How do you connect, how do you think about and connect the who and the what with the outcomes that you want to have? And how do you, then you going into tactical recommendations, how do you actually implement that? How do you accomplish what you want to accomplish by breaking down the steps of, how do you distribute that message? How do you position that message? What's the key or the core of the message that you really want to communicate? And of course, assessment. And oftentimes we think an assessment as a, how do you know it's working sort of approach. And I think that's really important. You always want to know if what you're doing is, actually landing, and if it's going well, or if you could do it better. But I think a really important piece for this is actually what I call the value articulation part of it. So first of all, you want to know what's of value so that you can communicate it. But this goes for the actual engagement process and the marketing and outreach process as well. How do you know what you're doing is actually creating value, and how can you find out more by building assessment into the process of community engagement? Because it's very essential to communicating impact to have this sort of thought process throughout it. So next. And so there's a number of tools and resources that we try to build in throughout here. In this one page on community engagement assessment, there's a couple of nice little examples here of an outreach institutional mission walkthrough, and then a outreach assessment template that you can use. And of course, please make it help us make this better by contributing your own examples. Next. And one thing I really like here, if you're just getting started and you're thinking of all the different ways that you can actually, find out more information, or figure out how the group that you want to work with or you want to communicate to, what are some of the best methods for that? There's a nice listing here of the various methods and like what it is and what you can kind of do, but also the limitations. One of the big things we heard in our surveys was that if people did any sort of assessment of outreach or engagement activity, it was head counts or gay counts. But it's not a real marker of the engagement or the usefulness of the event. Are people just there for the pizza, or are they actually taking anything away from what we're doing? Next. And so I think a real important part of building in that articulation of value is for the communication of impact. Actually telling the story, your story of value, in the most impactful way. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for this to Kristen.
Thanks, Devin. And I need to fully admit, my colleague Shannon and I were probably the last two brought on board. So you may be hearing from me, but really this is all built by that wonderful committee and other folks. So thank you. We got to chime in as the LibGuide was kind of being developed and bring in some of our expertise and resources. So kind of building off of what Devin was talking about around assessment tools and techniques, on that last slide there, often we need to kind of justify and explain why we're doing different things, what's going on and with different services, different resources, different outreach events and activities that we're doing it. Because often doing it for kind of just for fun or just because doesn't probably bode well for long-term kind of financial ability. And, we need to measure if that's actually achieving our goals. And so this all kind of harks back to different parts in the toolkit here, the whole idea of measuring impact. So kind of looking at pulling in that assessment piece and really tying it back to the goals. And I'm just going to highlight a few of these points because I think they were just beautifully written. The first point, we may gather head counts and other things, but to really focus on that story and let that data fill it in. So sure, we know how many people picked up pizza slices or how many pizzas we ate through during an event, but really, what was that trying to achieve? So we're trying to, again, tie it back to goals. We're trying to hopefully you can maybe gather quantitative and qualitative data to kind of help tell that story a little bit further. And then, of course, it kind of brings back to reporting back to whether it be stakeholders or whatever group that applies, and in whatever format that may be. So if you go to the next slide, it'll kind of talk about, on the lower part of this page, talks about pulling it together. So there are a couple samples here of reports that you could adapt and use, and we would love, as Devin, and pretty much every page within the toolkit, there's an opportunity to share. And so we're really encouraging you to help make this a living and breathing thing, because there are great examples all over the world and country. So we would really love to see those. But there's some sample ones of outlining, okay, here are the goals. What's the methodology? How did we collect our data? Reporting on the results, but help flush that out with a story. And then, did that actually achieve our results or achieve our goals or not? And even if it didn't, or if maybe you didn't get as many people turning out as you had hoped, that doesn't mean it's a failure. Maybe it will take an iteration or two, but this just provides a nice kind of couple templates that you can use and adapt and build off of. And if you build off of, please share back of ways that you can do that might be meaningful for you as a reflection, because I think outreach is all about reflecting on the process so we can improve it going forward. And then, of course, reporting up so we can get more time, more money, more staffing. All of that kind of can be built off of really strong cases through using reports and other things. So that's a little bit about the kind of communicating impact, measuring impact part of the toolkit. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to share a little bit about an actual use case of using the because statements, and I cannot take credit for this at all. One of our wonderful colleagues in the committee, Sabine Dantas, and her colleague Christelle Mayhew at Lynn University. These are all from them. So unfortunately, they couldn't join us today. So I'm sharing on behalf of them, and I hopefully got your names right. So here's just, how you can use because statements as kind of a piece of artwork, as thought-provoking pieces throughout your library. Use it as communication tools around outreach and engagement. So these slides you'll see are provided by them, and they're actual photos from their university. So next slide. So here you'll see various because statements, and some of them they adapted. In the previous slide, you might have noticed it said at Lynn University, at their library, they inserted their name. But here you can see different backgrounds, very clear fonts of things to help engage, and you can tie them into the various parts within your library or use them at different events. So here's just a couple pictures. So next slide. And so they have them posted throughout the library for right now, but they're thinking, okay, how can we use this further? And I know we're always looking to engage with our users online, so you can easily size these down to be the proper social media post size. They're real easy color blocks, eye-catching. You see quotes all over on Instagram and other places, so I think these would fit out great doing that. And then, of course, you can customize them. Things that are relevant for your initiatives or your library that are going on. So here you'll see actually on this slide is the green, why do we need Lynn Library? So, thought-provoking questions. And, if I was standing next to that as a library liaison at an event, that's a way to kind of engage with them. Use that as a prompt to have conversations, or use that and have people comment during, American Library, Library Week. That would be a great prompt. And then, of course, using outreach tables centered around that statement, whether it's around equity and diversity or scholarly communication. There's all different types of because statements that we could dream up. And here's, again, doing outreach that's kind of tied into these because statements is another opportunity. Next slide. So a few other ideas. Here's a couple other examples that you can see on your slide. Because libraries let everyone's voice be heard. So tying into that, you could use them in ads in a newsletter and promotional content, focus a PR campaign around because statements, having because statements on display. Again, just a few things. Next slide. So hopefully that inspired you a little bit to think of your own because statements and filter those up to our group. If you have some great ones and need some help with kind of designing them, Gail has been luckily enough to sponsor us to help create these because statements, so you can kind of adapt and add to those there. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia to talk about more resources and tools available to you.
Great, thank you so much, Kristen. So kind of the final tab on the LibGuide is this resources and tools. These are all the different content that we use to help inspire our own content and also to just provide more information for folks who had perhaps additional questions. And as both Devin and Kristen have mentioned, and I've mentioned it too, the toolkit is really designed to be almost like a crowdsourcing kind of element, and so there are opportunities for people to add their own examples within the toolkit itself, as well as, of course, engage with some of the materials and things like that. There are some downloadable, customizable materials under the framework for community engagement part, where, again, we were trying really hard to listen to folks. Technically, they're a little bit difficult to execute, so we don't have quite the wide range of materials that we had hoped, but we're also hoping to be able to continue to add on and create more. And so those are kinds of some of the things that we were hoping to be able to accomplish. And so I think with that, that is the end of our presentation. If we're missing something, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know. But we are now happy to take any questions that you have or engage in whatever discussion that you are interested in. If you want to find out more about any of these elements, we are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
We did get one comment I just want to mention from Rebecca Kelly. Hopefully it's okay that I share this, but she was using the because statements all over the library in April during Library Week, and she left them up all year. And then in December, she had a contest for students where they had to collect a statement and do a selfie with a caption of why that statement meant something. And then the first 10 won gift cards. So I think that's amazing, a way to engage with folks, put it on social media. So a way to like make that grow, and thank you. So if you have any of those, if you want to add that to the toolkit as a wonderful example, that would be great.
That's great. And I see also an example from Lisa as well. And that's wonderful. It's so great to see actual examples of folks using these and customizing them and making them their own. And that's kind of the whole point. I see a question from Catherine. Where does the user-generated content live? It's been a while since we created the guide, so I'm trying to go back, but I believe it lives within the LibGuide system. So we created these we use the survey functionality of LibGuides. So, and I know ACRL is the one who maintains them. So I'm fairly confident that once these materials are there, they will not disappear or hopefully be corrupted in any way. And that's part of the kind of the next steps that we're thinking through. What do we do with the content? How do we update it? And what are we going to do with the materials that we are collecting? So we'll stay tuned for that. We'll try to make sure that we get something out so folks know that we have a clear plan in place. But that's a great question. And I see that Kate said we have decorated our library classrooms with it. Yep, and that's wonderful. Yes, that's great. All of this is wonderful. Great examples. Any other questions? Anything else that perhaps was interesting or weird or unexpected?
Or is there something missing that we didn't cover that we should consider too?
No, that's a good question from Kendra about, are there the templates actually available for making the signs themselves? As far as I know, no. I don't know if Devin or Kristen know something that perhaps I don't. We just used, so I got permission from them to just use those 4 color blocks just to use as examples on the guide. I don't know how other folks, maybe Lynn University or anything, I don't know how they were able to actually, I don't know if ALA has the downloadable templates themselves, now that I'm remembering back. I think they actually do. You have to sign up, but it's through ALA, and I think they actually let you customize those.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to build on, so that Linda asked us the question whether the LibGuide, whether we enable the discussion board feature of LibGuides where people can communicate with each other. And I don't think we ever really considered that. I mean, we're using ACRL's subscription to LibGuides, but I think that one thing I was going to follow up and say is, I know this is lots to digest and people are still thinking about this. We have really worked closely with the library marketing and outreach group, the interest group from ACRL, and I think we'll be looking to them as a ongoing place for the conversations of how to make this more useful or things that we can add. So I would say if you're getting involved in marketing and outreach for libraries, look at that group and look at a way that we might be able to enrich this. I think that's a good place to kind of have that conversation and to think about what's going on right now. And maybe we'll talk to them about the utility of creating a discussion board, because I think it's something we hadn't even considered. Thank you, Catherine. I'll share that Facebook group link with everybody.
Yes, and thank you for the suggestion to add the templates for the statements themselves, and I will go ahead and make sure that we do that. Yep. Do the LibGuide, so we'll have it all there. Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the great things about this project. It really, it was a really group effort from so many different angles and much wider than I think we had anticipated. So it was great because it's not just one group working on something. There are multiple kind of efforts happening. So a question from Stephanie. I'd have to go look back. I don't think the feedback was that much different. Devin, do you recall kind of big differences between the different types of libraries?
No, what was interesting was the feedback seemed to be so different among every group, within every group. So like every academic, every ARL group, every community library, every community college library had really identified different stakeholders, different issues, different opportunities. And so one of the things we kind of came away with was we couldn't, it didn't seem like it'd be very useful to target different resources to different types of colleges, but just recognizing that every type of library has its own unique opportunities and challenges, and just kind of stay as vague in some ways as possible, but really trying to provide templates, or tools that might help anybody just start thinking about it and thinking about how do I even get started thinking about the process, and then catalyzing that into actionable items that I could tackle from there. That seemed to be what people just overwhelmingly wanted help with. So yeah, it was a decision kind of early on that we weren't gonna fragment the resources in those different ways.
And I think to add to that a little bit, we were surprised by how many, and this was, I think, true across all types of institutions. You know, most of the folks said that they didn't have specific positions or departments that did just marketing and outreach with them or for them. So we got the sense that a lot of people really were trying to kind of just do this on their own, whether they were from a larger institution or a smaller one. And so that's, again, kind of what we were trying to focus on is what can we do to give people the tools that they just need to get things done on their own with perhaps not a lot of resources, not the ability to hire, you know, a consultant or whatever, or graphic designer or things like that. We were surprised by how many different institutions kind of echoed that throughout the survey. So that's, yeah, to Devin's point, I think that's what we were trying to really accomplish. Anything else? Any other questions? Hopefully that answered it. Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Any other questions? Anything else? Okay. Well, I think I'm not seeing anything else. Again, you have definitely used the toolkit to provide us with feedback and questions and anything else. Again, thank you to everyone for taking the time today to join us. Thanks to Kristen and Devin, and of course, all the committee members, and to ACRL and Gail. There's so many people involved for all this effort. We're really looking forward to hearing how you will be utilizing this, and have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much.